no one deserves to die alone, and we need to see some serious changes in our system and how the RCMP deal with those kind of situations.
Tonight, Dale Culver's family will have to wait as the trial for RCMP officers charged in his death is delayed.
It's safer here and it's more quiet. The people are nice. They mind their own business. We help each other. I give them food.
Plus, Montreal opens the first ever permanent housing shelter for Indigenous people.
It's a historic day today for our people, to give hope to our people that have been seeking for that closure for their ancestors and for themselves and for our children as well.
And Manitoba will release residential school era records. Good evening, Tansei Anin. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. As the trial against RCMP officers charged in his death began, the family of Dale Culver held a press conference today in Prince George, British Columbia. Culver died in RCMP custody in 2017. APTN's Lee Wilson has more.
At a press conference in Prince George, Dale Culver's family members share how his loss devastated their family. In 2017, Dale Culver, a 35-year-old father of three, died when RCMP officers in Prince George attempted to arrest him. Their family detailed an emotionally draining process over the years with the coroner's office, police oversight bodies, legal advocacy groups, RCMP, and now the courts.
We've had to navigate a system that is just horrendous. And we've had to navigate a system that is somewhat disrespectful, somewhat exhausting, and trying to figure out how to navigate that system as a family. But know, any family that goes through this, you have a voice. If something doesn't feel right, something doesn't look right, ask the questions.
Over a month ago, BC Prosecution Service charged 5 officers concerning the death of Dale Culver. 2 officers, Constable Paul St. Marie and Jean Francis Monet, faced manslaughter charges. 3 officers, Sergeant Biani Osubio, Constables Arthur Dowman and Alexander McDonald, face obstruction of justice charges. Dale Culver's daughter, now 20 years old, Lily Speed Mox, has spent nearly 6 years seeking justice.
And no one deserves to die in the hands of the RCMP, and no one deserves to die alone. And we need to see some serious changes in our system and how the RCMP deal with those kind of situations.
The 5 officers were scheduled to appear in court tomorrow, but the case has now been adjourned till May 2nd. The family will be there tomorrow, calling for justice for Dale Culver and all families across Canada that lost loved ones in interactions with the police. Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Prince George.
And still in Prince George, the government of British Columbia will have outside help to investigate the potential mishandling of historic sexual abuse and harassment allegations against the RCMP. The Alberta Serious Incident Response Team will look into how the Prince George RCMP handled allegations made by about a dozen Indigenous girls between the ages of 12 and 16. Between 1992 and 2004, 9 Mounties and a judge were allegedly involved with the girls, but only the judge was charged and convicted due to an apparent lack of evidence on the others. The investigation follows a recent report by the RCMP's Civilian Review and Complaints Commission. The report horrified Indigenous leaders who say their people's trust in the Mounties is already low. Critics say Canada's bail system is too lenient, especially when it comes to repeat violent offenders. Last week, Justice Minister David Lametti met with his provincial and territorial counterparts. All options are on the table when it comes to bail reform, and this includes how Gladue factors are applied at bail hearings. APTN's Fraser Needham reports.
On Friday, Justice Minister David Lametti said his government will continue to study how Gladue principles are used in granting bail.
They were never meant to be something that undermined public safety, and so and the security of the public. And I think that's a message that we need to transmit, that they are there legitimately to be factored in as one of the causes of criminality or one of the factors that went in, and therefore ought to be taken into consideration at decision points such as bail or later in sentencing. But they're not meant to endanger the security of the public.
Bail reform has become a hot topic since an Ontario provincial police officer was shot and killed last December. Randall McKenzie of Six Nations is one of 2 people charged with first-degree murder in the death of OPP Constable Greg Porchella. A judge took into account McKenzie's Indigenous background when releasing him on bail for a previous gun-related offense. Doing so under a 1999 Supreme Court decision and using what is now called a Glad You principle, which is supposed to reduce the number of Indigenous people awaiting trial. Brantford Police Chief Robert Davis had this to say about Glad You at a recent parliamentary committee meeting.
As we talk about bail reform, I have witnessed firsthand how Glad You considerations, which were initially to be used for sentencing, are now impacting the bail system. And to be quite candid, are being, I would say, exploited. It's far too easy for an accused to claim that they have Indigenous heritage and thereby be given consideration.
Yet Jonathan Rudin of Toronto-based Aboriginal Legal Services had this to say about the use of Glad You factors at bail hearings.
So we have not seen, as I said, we haven't seen this huge leap in Indigenous people getting bail who wouldn't receive bail.
Rudin added there may be a misconception that repeat violent offenders are roaming the streets free on bail, but statistics don't necessarily show this.
I'm not aware that repeat violent offenders are getting bail in any huge numbers. Like if you have previous violent offenses and you're arrested with on another violent offense, it's going to be hard for you to get bail. I mean, that's just the reality. And we shouldn't be making bail policy based on one bail decision that very few people have actually even read.
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
In St. John's, Newfoundland, the president of Memorial University is taking a 6-week leave of absence and apologizing amid swirling controversy over whether she misrepresented her Indigenous ancestry. In a statement, Vianne Timmins said, in part, "While I have shared that I am not Mi'kmaq and I do not claim an Indigenous identity, questions about my intentions in identifying my Indigenous ancestry and whether I have benefited from sharing my understanding of my family's history have sparked important conversations on and beyond our campus. I have been reflecting on this feedback from the Indigenous community, and I sincerely regret any hurt or confusion sharing my story may have caused. That was never my intention, and I deeply apologize to those I have impacted." The National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation has signed an information sharing agreement with the Manitoba government. The agreement allows the Provincial Vital Statistics Branch to release documents related to the 14 residential schools that operated in the province. Documents like death certificates will allow the development of more accurate historical records about the schools. Under the agreement, survivors will be able to see information that could grant them access to residential school settlements. Grand Chief Kathy Merrick leads the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs.
This transfer agreement with the province will now allow survivors to access even more information as their partnership follows the agreement with Canada in 2022 to hand over more records on residential schools that Ottawa has been holding back.
We have to step aside a moment. We still have plenty more news coming up. Welcome back to APTN National News. Montreal's first ever permanent housing for homeless Indigenous people opened 2 weeks ago. It's good news, but it's just a drop in the bucket. As rents skyrocket and vacancy rates plummet, homeless camps continue to face evictions and will continue to appear, say community organizers. Amelia Fournier has more.
They are just moving us around with no reason. Trust me, no reason. Look up here. All this is nothing done.
Jacko Stebbin almost lost his makeshift home under the Ville-Marie Speedway in November. But Quebec's Transport Ministry and the City of Montreal decided to allow the homeless camp to stay up for the winter, postponing their construction in the area.
It's safer here and it's more quiet. The people are nice. They mind their own business. We help each other. I give them foods.
Now, spring is coming up, and so is their eviction date. Jacko doesn't understand why they can't just be moved to a spot they're not working on.
For the last 10 years, that's what they always do. They move us to another corner and they continue working here.
While Quebec's Transport Ministry says people need to clear out from under the bridge so construction can continue safely, David Chapman of Resilience Montreal says the campers will lose their sense of security and community if they're forced out.
What happens is people will leave their various their encampment, they'll go in search of abandoned building, a construction site, or perhaps a dark alleyway somewhere, and they will actually be in a less safe circumstance.
There are approximately 3,000 unhoused people in Montreal, and Chapman also says there's not nearly enough low-cost housing available for them, especially for those who don't fulfill admissions criteria, some of whom have been living at this camp in downtown Montreal.
There will be inevitably small little encampments here and there which appear in the city, and it seems to me that it would be wise for the city to jump out in front of that development and actually sanction officially certain spaces for encampments.
Expanding social housing capacity will take years to establish, says Chapman. So will the City of Montreal find a new campsite for this community of around 15 people in the meantime? Aliyah Hassan Cornal, the counselor advising on reconciliation, says,
C'est pas quelque chose qui est discuté en ce moment. La priorité de la Ville de Montréal, c'est de s'assurer qu'on est capable de pérenniser des ressources et d'avoir davantage de logements sociaux parce que c'est sur le long terme qu'on doit focus.
John Tessier is a support worker for the homeless and started his own organization, Advocacy Montreal. He knows the challenges of living on the street firsthand.
Never a shortage of them in this neighborhood.
A decade ago, he was battling addiction on the streets of Montreal.
There's so many steps that need to be taken, and you can fall through the cracks at any one of them. I mean, there's many organizations that will help you get into detox, but a week later, you're back on the street, and you're back at square one.
The newly opened Maison Aguatire hopes to prevent that. It's a supervised housing center where tenants will have access to mental health and addiction services managed by Projet Autochtone du Québec, or PAC, a homeless support organization for Indigenous people. Heather Johnston, director of PAC, says,
We've really focused on trying to provide housing for people, as I said, who may be facing multiple barriers to being housed, and also who may have not succeeded in other housing programs or who have been rejected from other types of housing programs.
Tenants will still have to pay 25% of their gross income to live there. The rest of the rental costs will be covered by Quebec and the City of Montreal. But Johnston says there's still not enough long-term funding secured for operations.
Okay, we have the bricks and mortar, and that's great. We have this beautiful home, but then we need funding to provide the services.
Quebec's housing ministry just canceled its financing program for social housing. In a written French statement to APTN, Quebec's housing ministry didn't say whether social housing builds would accelerate, but they said they would, quote, continue to support Quebecers when they're confronted with challenges within the prevailing difficult economic context. Meanwhile, this year, Montreal increased its police budget by the largest amount in the city's history, $63 million.
There's a lot of money for police and for bike paths, but it doesn't seem like there's enough funding for grassroots community organizations and frontline workers that already have a relationship with the community they're serving.
While the future for people experiencing homelessness is uncertain, people like Chapman, Johnston, and Tessier will continue to fight to put a roof over everyone's head.
And as a community, we have to we have to decide what's important to us. Do we care about people or we don't?
Emilia Fournier, APTN National News, Montreal.
Canada's Transportation Safety Board issued 4 recommendations last week following their investigation into the 2021 tugboat sinking that claimed 2 lives in British Columbia. The families who lost loved ones, along with marine workers, shared their responses to the report. APTN's Lee Wilson has more.
The Transportation Safety Board has released the report on the fatal sinking of the tugboat, the Indigenous, which claimed the lives of the boat's captain, Troy Pearson, and crew member Charlie Craig in 2001. According to the Safety Board, the tug sank in rough waters while towing a barge in the Gardner Canal. The Indigenous was in operation for more than 50 years, but never had an inspection, because under Transport Canada rules, vessels under 15 gross tons do not require regular inspections.
Accidents don't just happen. They're a result of many factors. In this occurrence, inadequate risk management and emergency preparedness, the absence of regulatory oversight, and verification of pilotage waivers all played a role. This accident illustrates the tragic outcomes that may result when all involved don't work together to address potential risks.
The Transport Safety Board made 2 recommendations to change that. Expand its surveillance program to include regular inspections of tugs 15 gross tonnage or less to verify these vessels are complying with regulatory requirements. Require authorized representatives of tugs of 15 gross tons or less to assess the risks present in their operations, including the suitability of tugs for specific towing operations. The Indigenous was operating with an exemption for a licensed pilot from the Pacific Pilotage Authority. The Safety Board is also recommending changes to the way that companies get an exemption. Verify that eligibility requirements are met before issuing pilotage waivers to companies operating tugs in compulsory pilotage areas. And implement a process to verify ongoing compliance with waiver conditions by companies. Federal NDP transportation critic Taylor Bachrach had a fiery message for the government.
Infuriating to reflect on a government that has known about these shortcomings in safety in this industry for years and yet has not acted. The measures they have put in place have not been effective. They have not been strong enough. Voluntary measures are not enough to protect workers, and we need better. This is a message for Omar Alghabra, Canada's Transport Minister. We demand that you implement all of these recommendations immediately.
Crewman Charlie Craig and Captain Troy Pearson's family also responded. Judy Carlick Pearson, the widow of Troy Pearson, said that families will fight to make sure that the Safety Board's recommendations are implemented.
Fight for the survivors that are out there that are risking their lives to go on the waters. Fight for change. Make sure these recommendations are put in place that protect your loved ones that strive and have a passion to be mariners like my son.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
All right, it's time for one more pause here on the program. A look at the opening of this year's Juno Awards is next. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Today's photo comes from Clarence Jones. Clarence says this was taken from his driveway in Gizagolka of the Gitxsan Nation, or the setting sun. Of the setting sun, excuse me. That's a great shot there, Clarence. If you have a photo to share with Turtle Island, you can send that photo to share@aptn.ca. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. We start on the East Coast, 1 degree in St. John's and 1 in Halifax. -4 in Cartwright and -11 in Coujawak. 3 degrees with snow in Quebec City and 3 in Montreal. -1 in snow in Toronto and -2 in Sault Ste. Marie. -1 in Clear in Wawa and +1 in Sioux Lookout. -19 in Churchill and -2 in Norway House. -3 in Barons River and -4 in Winnipeg. +1 in Regina and -5 in North Battleford. -5 in Buffalo Narrows and snow and -17 in Stony Rapids. As we head west, -15 in Fort Chipewyan and -9 in snow in Peace River. -1 in Edmonton and +1 in Calgary. 7 degrees in Vancouver and 6 in Bella Coola. 5 in Prince Rupert and -5 in Dease Lake. -13 in Beaver Creek and -28 in Rock River. -16 and some snow in Norman Wells and clear and -16 in Yellowknife. -20 in Fort McPherson and -15 in Colville Lake. -26 in Clear in Cambridge Bay and -20 in Chesterfield. -20 in Arctic Bay and -19 in Clyde River. The annual Juno Awards opened over the weekend in Edmonton, and Indigenous music was representing. APTN's Danielle Parody has the story.
Saturday night at the Edmonton Convention Centre, Digging Roots won the Juno for Contemporary Indigenous Group of the Year for their album, Shawanam. Digging Roots is a First Nations band with couples Shoshana Kish and Raven Kanaktata working together as a writing team. The duo says that they have been inspired to create music by their traditional teachings, as well as a mixture of roots, blues, jazz, and other forms. This is their second Juno Award since 2010.
Well, Shawanam in Anishinaabe means unconditional love. And I feel like those teachings of unconditional love come first and foremost from our first mother. And so, it's really, it's like a love song for the land, but also for our community, and it's about dreaming into the future.
The Bearhead Sisters, a Cree music group from Paul First Nation, won the Juno Traditional Group of the Year Award for their album Unbreakable. The sisters, Ali, Trina, and Carly Bearhead, performed traditional First Nations powwow music. Both groups performed at the honoring ceremony, which was held to celebrate all of the Indigenous nominees, as well as at the opening night of the Junos. Ali Bearhead said she dreamed of this moment from the time she was a little girl.
To win a Juno, I prayed for days like this for us, since we were little girls. Not seeing many Indigenous artists and many Indigenous people be a part of big platforms. And, I dreamed about it when I was a little girl, and I didn't tell the girls about it, but I always prayed about it.
They also took a moment to thank their fans.
We've built a kind of like a fan base on Facebook, and we've been doing a lot of promoting our music and not realizing that our music has not only touched our Indigenous communities, but worldwide. So, for them, thank you for supporting us through everything, because, without them, we wouldn't really be here.
The Juno Awards continue tonight, with the program beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Danielle Parody, APTN National News, Edmonton.
All right, that is all we have for you on this March 13th edition of APTN National News. For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Daryl Stranger. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great night.